All right, it is time for a Those Books book. Shannon reads those books and a sci-fi fantasy and weird book with the classic horror novel of Dracula by Bram Stoker. My goodness gracious. And I totally forgot. I had made this bookmark for it. It was from so long ago. I made this years ago. Like 3 years ago, maybe? I really like how that one turned out. Both of those images really, I think, work for Dracula. Dracula. So here we go. Bram Stoker's Dracula. This is my 34th book on the Those Books adventure. It is my 19th book from the Sci-Fi Fantasy and Weird series, and it was written in 1897, so 120 years old now, and it actually makes the Those Books list for being 104 on the BBC Big Read, and I'm really surprised that it actually wasn't on any other any other list. This feels like just such a classic book, but maybe feels like now that it's more of a classic story. I've seen so many film interpretations of this that it actually was a little hard to go to the book because I'm like, wow, I feel like I really know this story, so going back to the source is a little strange. I like starting with the source, not going back to the source after the fact, but I can't rewind time to all of those vampire films I've already seen. So what can you do? In terms of reading this one, it was a bit of a different experience as some of the other books have been on either Those Books list or the Sci-Fi Fantasy Weird one, in that I have attempted reading this book many times. I think I attempted it once many years ago, didn't stick, was just way too dry. And then about a year ago, I started it again, didn't stick. And then shortly thereafter, I tried listening to it via audiobook, and that didn't stick either. So, but I'd kept it on my currently reading list on Goodreads. And then sometime in the summer, I decided, you know what? I'm just going to finish all the books that are on my list. I'm just going to finish them. This has been on there way too long. I'm just going to finish it. So I did. I went back to the beginning and I just tried to read a chapter a day, and I just stuck with it till I finally read the whole thing. And it was not easy. It was easier this time, but it was a bit of a challenge. In terms of why I chose it just generally, it really does feel like one of those iconic books that you do just have to read, especially if you're interested in the world of horror, be it in terms of books or film. I'm a little bit more of a horror fan in terms of film. I still find horror books a little hard to read. This one I would actually classify as gothic. It is horror. It's the classic vampire story, if I haven't said it already, or one of the classic vampire stories. I did recently read Carmilla, which is predates this actually. But this is like the granddaddy of of vampire. There are so many movies. There's the Gary Oldman movie. How many are there? There's Hammer Horror. There's the 31 version. There's of course Shadow of the Vampire, which is a bit of a different take, but still, very, kind of true to the story in a weird way. It's more about film. But anyway, there's just I have seen so many vampire movies that trying to read this with fresh eyes was not easy. So it made it even harder, because one of the things I always like to ask myself after I read Those Books book is, did I understand it? And for the first several attempts, I didn't really feel like I was retaining it, but it was a combination of the fact that it's dry because it's an older text, but also that I know the story. And almost all of the films start off the same way this book starts off. So it's kind of it feels not that interesting, and I know the story. It feels dry, boring, and already known. So I was just like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? But I stuck with it because I tend to do that. And one of the things I did think was interesting about it was that it's an epistolary novel in the fact that it's all letters and journal entries and stuff like that. So that's cool, but it's also kind of confusing because the perspective changes throughout the book. And although there's some characters I was very familiar with, we have Jonathan Harker, we have Dracula, of course. No journal entries from him. I wonder if he was a journaler. And then we have Mina's perspective, and the doctor's perspective, and Ben Heisling's perspective. And one of the things that I did find confusing about it was that there was one character I kept on not being able to remember who it was. I cannot remember who it was. Um, 'Cause there was like another doctor type person or a lawyer or something. And I'm like, who's this other guy that's in the room? Like, what is he doing here? So that was a bit confusing. So, in terms of did I understand it, I would have to say I'm a little wishy washy on this one because I definitely was already familiar with the story. But then so I feel like I understood it, but am I understanding it from the text or from previous knowledge? I would say probably mostly from previous knowledge. But it wasn't, and I don't, yeah, there was that extra person that I was always confused at who they were. And because it flipped perspectives a lot, I wasn't a huge fan of that. Um, one of the challenges I have with that, especially with a horror novel, is that it's sort of you don't get the suspension of disbelief because if you think about it, you realize you're reading about something after it has happened that so whoever's writing it survived to write it. So I feel like it there's less tension, and I feel like tension is something that's important. I think they did a good job of it in this book. To be honest, there was only a couple of times that I felt that I noticed myself thinking, "Oh well, this person survived." And it's not all about who lives and who dies, but for me, a lot of it, yeah, a lot of it, sort of like the tension of the story is around that. So, anyway, so it was a challenging read. There's a lot of people I know that really enjoy this book and have it as one of their favorite books. And for me, I wasn't. That's not the experience that I had, and I don't know if it's because I come to it from knowing the story, and just sort of like seeing where the chips fall, and just I don't know. I didn't super connect to it. In all honesty, it was but I am sort of newer-ish into the realm of like horror and stuff in terms of the written word, and I think newer works are the ones that are speaking to me a bit more. But there was something very beautiful and classic about a lot of the things and the sort of romanticism, which is why I think it's very gothic because you have like the whole horror of the vampire and what's he doing and how is he doing this and what is it even what's going on, the mystery of it. That's actually, I think, maybe one of the big challenges in terms of reading it is when I read it, I can imagine if you didn't know the story, there was a lot of mystery involved in trying to figure out what was going on, how was it possible. And of course, as someone who's seen like all of the Dracula films, there's no mystery. There's no mystery. You know what's going to happen. You know what all the different things mean. So, you're just sort of like waiting for things to happen. So it wasn't as exciting from that perspective. And it wasn't. I'm trying to think about whether or not it was or wasn't what I expected. I don't know. I thought I expected it to be a little more accessible given the number of people I know that enjoy it. So I have been definitely doing better with classic novels and older works like throughout the years that I've been doing those books project, and I'm definitely retaining more and enjoying them more from a story basis, and understanding what's going on and stuff like that. But I still find some of the older works not as approachable. And this one, I think it's understandable, but I think it's just my general knowledge of the story made it not as interesting. So that's a little sad. It made it a bit of a disappointment, but I was extremely happy that I read it because it was just this. I had been working on it for so long, and it was such a feat to like finally, slug it out. So I was happy for that, and I think there is a great beauty in it in terms of the gothicness, but a lot of that comes from, and gothic is horror plus romance, so it's like there's romanticism as well as horror elements. Generally you're talking gothic here, but a lot of that was centered on the character of Mina, and I'm not a huge fan of the character of Mina, and everyone was so fawning over her, and just wasn't. I don't dislike her, but it's just like I don't know, like she was like the note taker and everyone loved her, and it's just kind of like there's nothing wrong with that, but I don't know. Anyway, obviously, is there something wrong with that? That's a whole other discussion. But there was yeah, it's very old. I felt it was very old school in terms of gender dynamics, which given that it was written 120 years ago, not that surprising. And I didn't expect it not to be like that. So, but I wasn't thinking about that at all, actually. So going into it, gothic nature just sort of kept on coming back in sort of that realm of things. Anyway, so overall, I'm happy I read it. I think it's pretty well written. Like I think it's well written, but I think in terms of classics, it was one of the less approachable ones, which was a disappointment. But you know, I'm going to put this on the shelf and it's going to stay there. I don't think it's going to be a book that I'm going to reread. Who knows? I'm way more likely to just keep on watching the Dracula movies because there's so many great ones to enjoy, and they all have a different tone to them. I'm trying to remember. I think there's also a Frank Langella one that I saw a couple years ago, and I think it was a Dracula one. It was definitely a vampire movie. And I think I'll always love vampire movies, and I think, and I like a lot of vampire stories, so it felt very important to go back to the beginning ish, Carmela, beginning. But they're not that far apart in terms of years. But yeah, to go to the one that people reference the most, it felt important. So I did it. I made it through. I slugged it out. And yeah, whew, that was a hefty one. So let me know your thoughts on Dracula. Have you read it? Did you find it approachable? And I don't know, maybe it's the edition I had, like they're really tiny writing. I don't usually worry too much. I just know that the pages are going to take longer to read. But I was happy that because it was in diary entries and stuff, some of them were 3 lines. Some of them were 2 pages. So that made it an easier, and they are separated out into chapters as well. So that made it more approachable in the fact that you could have it in smaller chunks. But generally, it was a feat. It was a feat to get through it, and I'm glad that I am done. I'm glad that I am done. So, yay! It's been a while since I've done a book review, so I hope you enjoyed that. And I know that we're going into the horror-y season of Halloween and October, so definitely hoping to read some creepy stuff. So I wonder what I'll get up to. Who knows? Thanks so much for watching.